microphone.
I'm Michael Martin, and I am trying to convey the answer to solving the homeless problem on a national scale. I learned to pledge allegiance when I was a kid, and I became a caregiver, a CNA. I've worked with mentally handicapped as well as geriatrics. I've worked in group home programs and work programs for these individuals. And during the course of my life here, 6 years ago, I became chronically homeless, and I remained so for 5 years. And during that time, I tried to find the solution to our problem. And so what I'm trying to do is a series of explanations, presentations of what I've come up with. It's called the Agricultural Housing and Education Program, which if it is implemented in each state of the union and funded by the federal government, if we redirect our HUD and federal funding block grant money of $100 million per state roughly, instead of having that go there, it goes directly to the state. Also, it could be funded by some of the lottery money in the state of Oregon, the marijuana tax money. Some of that money can be used. But right now, 60% is pork, because we're putting it into the 501(c)(3). If everything is owned by the state, mandated by the federal government and the state government, for that funding to come straight through the state, also to be added. And what I hope to do eventually is eliminate the food stamp program, because the food stamp program is split by the Fed and the state. Whatever the Feds put up for the food stamp program in each state matches that. And it's an antiquated program that just simply is $534 billion a year nationwide that is useless. Nobody can live on $190 a month. Forget about it. Hamburger is $5 a pound. Bringing us back to the Agricultural Housing and Education Program. In order for this program to work and to be incepted, the first thing we'll have to do is that each state must inventory all surplus land and all surplus properties, be it closed schools, closed prisons, closed military, and it all must, the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Transportation, each city owns property that has probably been owned by that particular city since the inception of that city. Each county owns property that has been owned by that county since that county was formed. And the state also owns property that's not being used for parks and recreation, it's just sitting there. And we have to inventory and really do a modern inventory via computer and all that, satellite, everything, of everything that we have at our disposal, because we have to create labor we have to create labor for a lot of people. 20,000 homeless people in the state of Oregon. How many are able-bodied and able to work if we presented work to them? Probably quite a few. And the easiest way to create labor is not by building a factory or a road or a bridge. It's by creating an agricultural enterprise by which at the end of the day our agriculture can be sold, and that money can be put back into the program, and it can also bolster the state economy in each state. So using the state of Oregon, for example, let us say that the state of Oregon has large counties and a lot of land that is owned by something. Because there are no roads going through it, in my mind, there just seems to be a lot of surplus land in the state of Oregon. So it goes to my 100 person and 100 goat theory. If we have a big chunk of land and we turn 100 goats loose in it, to help clear the land, and we have 100 men. Eventually we have a cleared piece of land, we haven't cut any trees, and we bred some goats just to get it ready for an agricultural enterprise. What I initially started this doing was to create a halfway house program for those most in need of care. In other words, some of these people are in need of care. They are medically or mentally or in whatever fashion, they're not capable of fending for themselves. And for example, we have Mr. Smith lying on the ground in a park with nothing but a tattered blanket left to his name. That's all the possession he has. He's been a chronic alcoholic for however many years it took him to get there. And in addition to, because of that, he has malnutrition issues that have caused him some kind of brain damage. So the idea of Mr. Smith getting up by himself and getting into his own housing and being a productive citizen again, well, that's pretty remote. And what I'm suggesting is that we offer people a voluntary program. Say, we want you to come to the agricultural housing and education program, and where you'll be given shelter, and we're going to get you cleaned up. We're going to figure out, we're going to assess whatever it is that is ailing you, be it malnutrition, be it alcoholism, be it some form of mental illness. We need to figure out how we can allow you or enable you to be as productive and as healthy as we possibly can. And we need to do that with each and every one of our citizens who are in need of that type of care. We've come to that point in our history where we don't have enough work and we don't have enough housing for our own nation's people. So part of that problem is our Section 8. We are 8,000 units behind in each state for Section 8. What Section 8 means is that you have to already have SSI, be growing as a disability, in order to qualify for Section 8. The problem is that the private sector, the people who are investing in properties, would much rather invest in a condominium and get X amount of dollars from that condominium as a return on their money. In other words, there's no money in building housing and then relying on the Section 8 to pay for it and give us a return on our money as a private individual. So therefore, the state and the federal government, especially the federal government, we have to step in like we did back in the 50s and build what we call project housings back then, only that's not what we're doing. We have to build Section 8 housing, and one of the ways that we can do that, well, Section 8 housing, right now what we have is we have people who got their Social Security and they got on the waiting list, which is a 2-year waiting list for Social Security. In the process of getting into housing, they become homeless and they lose everything that they possibly have. All their possessions, whatever. If they manage to hang on to it, great. But I've seen examples after example of this on and on, having lived outdoors for 6 years. One of the reasons I became politically active and created the design for this program was because I had a neighbor who got his Social Security, he was in between housing and the rescue mission was full, and so he got a tent and went out there into the woods along with the rest of us, and we had a very bad winter, 6 weeks of sub-zero temperatures. And while he was in the process of being on a 2-year waiting list for housing, Section 8, he couldn't afford anything else, he fell asleep with his propane stove on and died. That is an American citizen that had our federal government been taking care of him, been taking responsibility for his citizenry, in my opinion, then he wouldn't have died, period. If a church would have let him sleep on the floor, he wouldn't have died. So these are issues that we have, and we can't expect the private sector, the 501(c)(3)s, to take responsibility for the American citizens. We have 7 million, roughly, homeless Americans out here. We have 7,000 Americans dying every year due to lack of housing, from exposure. Some are being beaten, some are being murdered, stabbed. 4 of them in San Diego 2 years ago. Somebody soaked a blanket full of gasoline, threw it on them, and caught them on fire. Not only is that a horrible way to go, but imagine the mentality. Just because somebody is homeless, let's scapegoat them to the degree that we commit a hate crime and catch them on fire. We have 1,400 people living on the streets of Portland, Oregon, which I intend to give a presentation strictly on Portland, Oregon, and what some of the solutions to their problems are. But we have vigilantes that think the way to get rid of the homeless is to go around and catch their belongings on fire while they are at the soup kitchen getting something to eat. They come home and find their whole tent on fire. I got to call the fire department and everybody else out there. That happens over and over and over again. And the social stigmatism, homeless, it's like you're an alien. People have no regard, no respect for you, and if they're offering to help you, chances are they're trying to take advantage of you some way or not. There's labor cheats. I've had people have me work on their yard for 6 or 8 hours and hand me a $20 bill and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's all I have to pay." What are you gonna do? You worked because you were desperate for the work. You wanted good, honest work, which brings us to the reason why people hold up cardboard signs. It is because they are honest people that don't want to commit a crime, and it's the only way that they can survive, because nobody will give them a regular job, not even at McDonald's. If you don't have an address, you can't file your taxes very well. You're not going to apply for student loans if you can't file your taxes. You're not going to get a regular job because nobody wants to hire you. Obviously, if you're outdoors, you're not bathing very well. So, you're not a very stable prospect when I can hire Joe Smith that just got out of high school and needs a job to pay for college. The private sector is not going to employ you because you're not a good choice to them, because you're not a good return for their money. They want their money's worth. So, there's no blame involved. But our federal government does have to take responsibility for our homeless citizens, and that is by redirecting all the HUD and federal money. For example, $100 million last year in the state of California was allocated by the state government for services for the homeless because the mayor of San Francisco and Los Angeles both declared emergencies. And what that physically means is that now we have $100 million of federal grant block money that the 501(c)(3)s are able to apply for that grant money for their soup kitchen or their rescue mission or whatever. And at the end of the day, we didn't create any work and we didn't create any housing for these people, and we will still have the very same amount of homeless people that we did before we ever started. And how much agriculture and housing and labor could we have created by a different use of the same $100 million? And this is not just last year. This is money that we have been spending in the hundreds of millions of dollars in each state every year for decades. And we've had 7,000 Americans dying every year nationwide for decades. I mean, it's not just we can't blame one administration after another. This whole issue has built to the problem to the point where we have a crisis. We have people living under every bridge, in every part of the woods, in every abandoned car wherever they can find, and their safety and welfare is not being looked after because that's not a safe and well way to live. I know. I've had my teeth broken. I've been jumped on twice. I've had lots of possessions stolen. On and on I could go, and I'm a lucky one. I could have died out there several times over. Back to this program. Once we have done this, and schools, closed schools, we somehow couldn't fund a school, so it got closed. Well, that school has showers and it has a cafeteria already in it. All we have to do is open it back up, create a dormitory situation, plus there's a classroom or two in there we can use for education. Closed prisons. I know there's a closed women's prison in the state of Colorado, for example. That building can be gutted and refurbished into a dormitory style setting, and the property can be used to teach agriculture. So, our vacant schools, our vacant prisons, if we have a vacant military base that has been closed, that has to be mandated by the federal government. This all has to be crafted into a bill nationwide so that each state can take the inventory. There's 141,000 homeless people in California. There are 20,000 in Oregon. Kansas has 10,000. Nebraska has 10,000. So some of these states, but still, I went to grade school in a little town of 300 people. To me, 300 people is a lot of people. You have to, in order to create work and housing for even as many as 300 to 500 people, it's a monumental task. We have small cities of people in each of these states. And if we don't find a way to create work and housing for them sustainably, then we're going to have more of these people, and it's just going to go on and on. There already is no place for them to go. They cannot go out into the woods and homestead. Gone are the days of Daniel Boone. Every place that you are is physically owned by somebody or a company or something. You are trespassing regardless. So you're committing a crime just by being homeless. In 2014, the United Nations Human Rights Committee criticized the United States for the criminalization of homelessness, noting that such cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment is in violation of international human rights treaty obligations. And this was written by Ms. Sarah Cleveland, who is a professor of law at Columbia School of Law, and she also sits on our board, she's our United Nations representative. So that was in 2014, here we are in 2017, nothing has changed. 31 cities in our country have made it a criminal act to feed the homeless. In the state of Florida, there was an Episcopalian priest that was elderly. I think he was like 80 years old. They gave the guy 140 days for feeding the homeless. I hope he sues them for every day he spent in jail. But this it's a monumental task to explain this, and let me just go to where I want to go. Also, Los Angeles and Seattle are imposing property taxes now because they've run out of ideas. And so they want to create another 50 or $100 million for the cities, and a quarter cent or a half a cent gets added to people's property taxes. At the end of the day, it's going to be the same thing. They haven't created work, they haven't created housing, they're going to have the same amount of homeless people, if not more, and they spent that money already. Next year, they're going to allocate some more money to do the same thing. And remember, agricultural housing and education program, that is what I want to be the name of the bill that needs to be crafted from a federal level. It has to come from the federal level. Each state has to inventory all of its surplus. So, and we're only using money that we're already spending. It's just being redirected. And it's being redirected into stuff that's mothballed that can be made use of, and we have to. So let me say that that's the end of part one of my presentation, and let me go to part two here in just a second. I'll be back with you in just a second. Stay tuned to the next one. Turn off.